Yes, a very good morning to all viewers. Welcome back from the break, and we're glad you're still watching the Daybreaker. My name is Isaac Olupotakonya. I would like to officially say that thank you so much for sticking on Record TV. And of course, we do this every Monday to Friday. Of course, the cutters of Record TV. We keep bringing for you what we call breaking stories. And an opportune time, we're coming to discuss with you the challenges, the times, and of course, the trends, of course, in relationship to our society, and of course how we are governed, ruled, and how we actually receive what we call services across different walks of life. Today, we actually much inclined, of course, to look at something particular in relationship to the talk of the nation. We have been talking about the politics of Uganda. We have been talking about corona in Uganda. But there's this particular topic that we have always heard about, but we've taken it for granted like it doesn't pertain us. And this topic is the topic of the Uganda's growing debt. You are there and saying, it's upon them, let them keep picking the money. But yeah, we're at the end of the day that you, your children, your grandchildren are all part of this debt. Do you know your portion when it comes to repaying this debt to the loans, to those who give us the loans, to the lenders? Do you know how much you pay per year? Do you know how many years you're going to take in order actually to clear this debt? Do you know your responsibility as a taxpayer in this country? Do you realize that most times you deserve to have a say on the borrowing this money, but most times you've tended, of course, to be someone actually who puts down your hands and says, that doesn't belong to me? At the end of the day, do you realize that the Ugandan debt belongs to all of us and will all get back to either builders or pinch us for the rest of our lives? So today in the studios, I'm so much delighted to be hosting a gentleman all the way from the Uganda Debt Network, and that is none other than Odaro Jude Tadeo, who happens to be the programs manager at the Uganda Debt Network. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
Good. Greet the viewers.
Glad to be here, and greetings to the viewers.
All right, that's so good. What do you do at Uganda Debt Network?
Uganda Debt Network, I work as a program manager and specifically responsible for citizens empowerment and engagement in policy decision-making processes. So focuses around empowering community in terms of capacity building, generating the necessary literature to inform and educate, but also to give them the opportunity to be able to engage from an informed point of view.
I would like first to ask you, all along, very many of the Ugandan citizens will hear the word debt network. They believe maybe this is a financial organization whose work is to collect debts. I don't know, can you break it down and tell them what the Uganda Debt Network is all about?
Yeah, thank you very much. Uganda Debt Network is a national policy advocacy organization that whose mission and mandate is to work towards ensuring that public resources are used for prudently used for the benefit of all Ugandans from the time of generation, appropriation or utilization, implementation, monitoring and evaluation and accountability. And in doing that, Uganda Debt Network, founded in 1996 as an advocate for debt cancellation for Uganda, because at the time Uganda's debt levels have reached unsustainable level because of the previous political instability and the collapse of the economy, and therefore for Uganda to pick up its pieces, there was need for debt cancellation so that then the resources generated or saved from the HIPC, a highly indebted poor countries initiative, would then therefore be channeled towards improved service delivery. And the result of that advocacy locally, nationally and internationally, is that Uganda became one of the first country, actually the first country to qualify for debt relief. And a year later, it benefited from debt cancellation. As a result is that then now we have to come back and the drawing board and say, so the objective has been achieved, so what next? The question is now, where are these resources going to be put or invested? And as a result is that we engaged the government and started the process of creating the Poverty Action Fund, which was a basket funding where the saved resources would be put together to address the issues of universal primary education, primary health care, rural feeder roads in a bid to modernize and transform the agricultural sector, water and sanitation, as some of the critical areas that complement each other but can spur economic activity, but also empower the communities to engage in increased production and productivity. And as a result, we have been involved in engaging government in the policy processes, monitoring, participating, mobilizing, engaging in the budget planning, budgeting, monitoring and evaluation, raising awareness, monitoring service delivery, budget execution, so that proactively we can be able to raise the concerns regarding the shortfalls in implementation at the earliest opportunity possible. And through that process is that then we are able to engage government from an informed point of view, where citizens not just remain passive recipients of public goods and services, but also active recipients of public goods and services. And over time we have evolved to engage in research, we review budget policy documents, analysis, and be able to commend the government for the efforts, positive strides moving forward, but also challenge governments on areas where we think that a little more can be done.
I would like to ask you something. When you look at Uganda's debt burden, are we safe as a country?
Yes, the debt burden is huge. And the reason why we still exist to talk about debt burden is because we think, yes, while debt in broad terms is not bad, because you incur debt because you need to desire to do so much, but the resources at your disposal are quite limited, and therefore for you to be able to fill the gap, you need to borrow. Just like we borrow as individuals, the same principle applies to government, which is informed by planning and budgeting. But what is important is that we need to be conscious in terms of borrowing by being very clear on what we want to do with the money, but also ensuring that actually the money does exactly what it's supposed to do.
I was going to come actually to ask you that you being actually researchers who research much in relationship to how this money is borrowed and how it's utilized. Do you think, irrespective of our big debt burden, is this money doing the right work it has been called for?
So currently our debt burden is huge and it is a worry. It's a great concern, both in the government but also in the civil society. As Uganda Debt Network, we have been following and tracking debt despite sometimes the scanty and contradictory data available from government, from Bank of Uganda, from Minister of Finance. But the debt is worrying, and just like the Sub-Saharan Africa, for last year there was a report which highlighted that most of the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa were under the threat of debt distress. And already by November we had about 6 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa that are they're already distressed. And proactively Minister of Finance with the support from ODI organized the first conference on debt management and sustainability in the East African region. That was way back on 25th, started on 25th in Feb in Munyonyo. And there was great concern about the growing debt, but also is that how would we reap the dividends of debt? No, it's one thing to have the debt, but if the debt is not delivering the desired dividends, then that's where there's a problem. For example, currently if you have a national budget of 45 trillion, around 45.3 trillion, but with a debt stock of about 47 trillion, it means already your debt burden is more than the resources that you envisage to deliver. And over time, we've seen that the debt servicing is taking the first call on our budget in terms of priorities, outpacing our budget for health, outpacing educational budget, outpacing the budget for the social service sector, outpacing agricultural budget, outpacing the tourism budget, and yet these are the critical sectors of the economy that otherwise would be able to receive a huge, substantial amount of funding or resourcing because they generate substantial return in terms of revenue generation.
Wow, that is so much beautiful. I'd like to say to all those who are catching us from, thank you so much for joining the Debt Breaker Show. They were discussing about the growing Ugandan debt, and of course, we are moving ahead to share what we call the debt cancellation. For many of you out there have been wondering what exactly is happening in our country. every time they read news, you hear actually parliamentarians coming out in case there's a controversial bill or in case there's a controversial fund to be approved. You find them coming out to say, we can't take this anymore. We're actually reaching weird levels, of course, when it comes to borrowing debt. What can we do about this? Should we continue doing the same? But for you, you've been sitting at the comfort of your house saying, all is well. Everything is fine. I think we are moving forward. But how forward are you moving? Which strategies are on ground to see that the country that you're going to be paying those debts for is actually progressing? During the studios, of course, we have a gentleman by the names of Odaro Jude Tadeo, and of course, he's sharing with us much about the Ugandan debt burden. Of course, we shall be giving you a chance maybe to pick up like one caller, of course, to share with us, of course, what you think can be right in relationship to this whole debt issue. Yes, the current debt being high. What do you think can be done?
Yeah, even before we get into what can be done is that we need to recognize the fact that the situation was bad even before COVID.
Meaning, COVID has not yet actually worsened things. It's just that things began crippling before.
Yes, we've been struggling much as in terms of the sustainability. It was still within the threshold of the 50% of the GDP. But of course, that was external debt. So if you added the domestic debt, that means you're already way above the 50% threshold set for debt to be sustainable. And by the coming of the advent of COVID, which has hit world economies, now without sparing Uganda, that means that there is subdued the economic outlook is quite lukewarm and not promising, and if it's a concern for everyone, there has been a skyrocketing unemployment, loss of livelihood for the citizens, and therefore when the citizens lose a livelihood, then therefore they cannot effectively participate in economic activities that generate income and to the government, and therefore they are constrained to pay taxes. So as government is seeking resources to revamp the health sector service delivery, address the COVID, address other calamities, the floods, the other diseases that keep breaking in and out of our country, the Ebola and so on, the appetite to borrow keeps growing, okay? And yet the production sector is not operational. The tourism sector is at the hold. For example, if you're importing initially, having 100 importers, probably today as we speak, you have about 5 importers. So there's no way you're going to raise the anticipated revenue from 5 importers, which you had targeted 100 importers, for example. So that then there is a problem. So that means that the only option that you have as a government is to borrow. For example, since January alone to date, I think we have had at least 16 loan requests to Parliament, and therefore our debt is going to grow. And if you had the recent meeting where the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Finance, actually hinted on debt cancellation. Of course, the World Bank and the World Bank Group and the G20 approved certainly April and approved that debt servicing suspension initiative for the poor countries for 6 months. That is up to December. You see, suspension does not mean
exclusion.
Yes. So you suspend, yes, but the burden remains and continues to grow. Okay. So that, and yet the production and productivity of the economy is not up to the task to raise the required resources to deliver services that are required, but at the same time pay the service, the loan. If we expect to collect, for example, in the current financial year about 21 trillion shillings, you might probably collect already with a deficit of about 2.5 trillion, which now has already gone to about 5 trillion, and it is continuing to grow. Then that's where we are coming together as civil society as Uganda Debt Network, initiative that is gaining momentum globally to advocate for debt cancellation, so that, for example, if the outstanding debt can be forgiven to date, then the current debt that we're contracting as nations, your low-income countries, can be pushed to the next whatever, given a grace period about 10 years, because COVID is here, we don't know when it's going to go.
True.
So that's the advocacy we are building momentum on. And to many it may look very strange and uphill task. Yes, it is, but it is possible. Because we've seen this happen in 1996-97 under the HIPIC initiative. We've seen that happen under the MDR, Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative in 2006. So there is hope that this can be able to happen. The financial sector, for example, has hit. They have restructured the debt portfolio of about 3 trillion, which has been restructured. And that means that the private individual and the household debt is also another to worry for us to worry. While we are concerned about the external debt, but also the domestic debt, private debt is a huge problem that we need to be concerned about and must find mechanisms to deal with it. In the budget speech, the Minister of Finance had indicated a package, a relief package of about 5 trillion. Where is it going to come if you're not going to borrow? Okay, and otherwise they shall have a relief package that is only on paper but not accessible to those who badly need it. Interest rates haven't gone down in the banks, that there are for many people and companies who will remain closed because of inability to access credit and financing to implement in productive sectors. So as a country, we need to undertake austerity measures as a nation to be able to cut our public expenditure, which of course is very difficult because government is always apprehensive and not comfortable and very difficult to downsize, to reduce itself. Its governments are large by nature and amorphous, and therefore they need to think about cutting expenditure. And in this case, we are talking about wasteful expenditure or non-regular expenditure in the budget, which are not priorities. Because, for example, right now nobody is traveling, both in the government but also in the private sector. That means what initially had been budgeted for travel, for entertainment, for workshops, for so many things that can be avoided, and so let this one wait because this one can't wait. I think we can be able to make a saving, but also that saving needs to be invested in priority sectors. For example, we've had a huge investment in road infrastructure, and most of these investments are conservative in nature and not necessarily turning, because grading the tarmacking a road doesn't necessarily increase production.
True.
Because that has been improved and the returns on the investment are long term. So we need to look at short areas where you can put money, prioritize our investment, ensure that there is prudent, there is efficiency in allocation, there is efficiency in utilization, and there is efficiency in accountability, so that we can be able to build trust from the citizenry.
So that's so beautiful. And like you said, that the number is going to be a screen of your television. Of course, 0200 923 257. We'd like you to call in and find out from the experts themselves, the men who actually have been doing research in relationship to Uganda debt burden. Yes, let's look at what areas are actual priorities, of course, in Uganda as a country. Feel free to call us and communicate with us, and at the same time follow us on our social media platforms. That's Record TV Uganda on Facebook, Record TV Uganda on Twitter, and Record TV Uganda on YouTube. Let's converse, let's discuss, let's talk about our country, and let's talk about the state and the progress of our country. You may for long keep dodging the same, the way you always dodge politics, but you forget the fact that the more you're silent, the more you don't speak out, the more you don't start questioning why things happen, the more things stay the way they are, and at the end of the day, they get back to haunt you. I would still get back to the basic question I asked you. Do you think the money we borrow goes to the right priority sectors, according to your general analysis?
Yes, the money that is borrowed is invested in the priority sectors. But the biggest challenge that we've had and continue to suffer as a country is, one, the issues to do with the capacity. The capacity to absorb and utilize the resources that have been borrowed in the user sectors, for example. Is that if you're going to borrow 10 million or 1,000, then your capacity to utilize is only up to the tune of 2,000, you know that there's a problem. So that's why you look at the Auditor General's report, the absorption capacity is extremely low. And because of the limited capacity, both in terms of human and technical, is that the planning, government borrows money when it is actually not ready to receive the money and utilize it. In terms of planning, and that increases the cost of borrowing, because once you contract a loan, you start counting on the interest.
From the time they give it to you?
Yes, and over time, the appetite for a non-concessional loans has also increased. And especially, like, for example, the non-concessional loans, the huge percentage is coming from Exim Bank in China. So these are private, this is private money.
Mm-hmm.
So while we advocate for debt cancellation from the World Bank, the IMF,
for the private ones,
donors, the private one is a tricky business. Because the terms and conditions are different. So that's the big part. But 70% of that is coming from Exim Bank and China alone. So the worry is that probably if we have staked some collateral, we're likely to lose it to the foreign companies. But we think to capacity, 3 is there is what we call even when we've contracted and borrowed money, there is a difference between what is disbursed and what is not disbursed. And that also explains further the issue of our capacity to deal with it. Is that yes, I've borrowed 10 million from the bank, for example, asked for a loan of 10 million. The bank you're only able to say first give me 20 million. I mean 5 million.
5 million.
You get it? Mm-hmm. So the 5 million which has come is what government captures in the book, in the balance sheet as debt. But there is a remaining 5 million. Which hasn't been disbursed yet, but it's still your money. What does it mean? The longer I keep it here, is that the longer I charge you for keeping for keeping your
money that we've agreed that you're going to have.
Yes, the interest is the sum total of the amount. 2, the third issue is about accountability.
Yeah, accountability.
Many of the the loan funded projects are not performing well as expected in terms of time, but also in terms of the expected outcomes. And that means that you and me, who have got the ultimate responsibility to pay the taxes, are actually not getting the value for money. Okay. Otherwise, we wouldn't making so much noise about debt, because we'd say yes, our livelihoods are secure. We go to health facility, the services are on point, facilities are well equipped, the services are up to standard. You go to the education sector, is that yes, the quality of education in public schools is worth talking about and discussing it in the public. The quality of our roads and infrastructures, because some of the roads, by the time they are commissioned, they are already due for maintenance. So that means that there is an issue of accountability.
I saw a scenario of the Ginger Express Highway, whereby the bridge actually started blocking off itself in the shortest while.
Yes, if you remember by the time we commissioned the road for between that was Soroti Mbale and Mbale Tororo,
there was already damage.
It was already damaged. The road was overdue for
maintenance.
So that means, and this was borrowed resources. So those are the issues that we are grappling with. The secondly is that the issue of balancing long-term investments with short-term investments. Is that then we're investing in infrastructure, for example, we are forgetting that the infrastructure that we're building today is supposed to benefit the citizens living today and those that will come. So I should not sacrifice my livelihood for the future generation that I will not be, that I don't.
Yes, I'm not sure of whether I will be there.
So that also shifts the accountability horizon. Is that then you're investing money where there will be the people who are here today will not be able to hold you accountable. So those are the areas that we think that the government needs to strengthen, but also enhance transparency, accountability in the loan, debt, contractual processes. Many times you just hear figures and numbers being announced, but the question is, where has the conversation taken place? How have the citizens been able to make an input in towards the loan, whether actually the loan is required and the activities for which the loans are being contracted? But also, if you get a part of the loan and part of the money goes into things like expenditure on workshops, we no longer need workshops to discuss what to do.
The world has changed. The world has moved forward.
The world has moved. Things need to be discussed on the project site.
Exactly.
Mobilize the stakeholders. agree with them on the expectations and so that we can be able to minimize the expectations, bring them to the manageable level. Let's flag the risks that we anticipate and mitigate them earlier. Have a mitigation plan and have it integrated in the planning and the budgeting, so that throughout the process we are monitoring and tracking and raising our concerns and getting onto the table and say, okay, look here, we are not moving as fast as we should. Why is the problem? Okay, the cost of just construction alone, I think we've read that the cost of road construction in Uganda is more or less the highest.
Yes, actually, vis-a-vis all other countries within.
It is the highest
range.
Yes, and there's never been a justified explanation as to why we spend more per kilometer. Yet many countries are spending less, even given their unfavorable geographical locations.
I'd like to say that all of you are catching us. Yes, today we're discussing the Uganda debt. Yes, I hope that you've picked a message from, of course, an expert in the studio with us, who happens to be the programs manager of Uganda Debt Network. That is Mr. Odaro Jude Tadeo. Of course, he's taking us through how the Ugandan debt is standing, and of course, the challenges that actually are within there, and of course, how we get into actually having these debts not actually give us what we call the work we expected. Yes, talked about the capacity. Yes, the money is there. We have the plans, we have the ideas, we have the areas we need to work on, but the country's capacity actually to have the things actually executed as expected has been a very big challenge. Yes, in terms of even human resource personnel. You're there, yes, it's okay, the money comes in. First of all, you look at that, the skilled resource is a challenge. So you sit back again and say, oh, the money has come. Now where do we run to? Whom do we pick? Should we go to South Africa? Should we go to Egypt? Should we call Chinese still to come this side to put this? Okay, there's a challenge when it comes to our capability, our capacity to execute all this. I would like to say, Mr. Tadeo,
yes,
is there anything you would love to share with Ugandans now left in relation to the debt in the next 3 minutes as we summarize our show?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we are calling upon Ugandans to join the campaign. I think in this campaign we are in it together with the government, and the government has expressed its desire for debt cancellation as a critical step moving forward. Because even otherwise, the economies, the countries, Uganda will continue to struggle. This campaign is joined by Eurodad, some of the international organizations in Europe. The Jubilee is part of this initiative, and there is a lot of conversation at the international level, and we're in partnership with both local, regional, and international organizations pushing for this. But also, this is also a building momentum, because, for example, we have the World Bank spring meetings. And remember that when we had the Minister of Finance and ODI had the workshop date, Sub-Saharan workshop in December, in February, they had developed a paper which was also targeting the World Bank spring meeting coming forward. We have the UN heads of state meeting, a summit coming, the G20 summit. So it is important that we build consensus around these citizens, so that we can build the pressure from below. True. Because the pressure from above is not sustainable, but the pressure from below can be able to bring the required results.
Okay.
Two is that citizens need to wake up and play their oversight role as taxpayers and get away from the perception of thinking that government delivers free services and therefore they are passive recipients of public goods and services. But we're encouraging them to be vigilant, ensure that they are actively involved in the planning processes. Our Public Finance and Management Act reinforces the fact that planning should be bottom up, and therefore they must be able to take the initiative to demand and hold our leaders accountable at different levels. Many times they look at the head of the state, yes, but then even at our local committees, we've got leaders to whom we must demand accountability and hold them accountable, so that we know the standard of services that we desire, and every other time as a citizen not satisfied with the service, you don't complain in the corridors.
All right. But I would like to say that all of you have been part of the discussion. Thank you so much. The gentleman has flowed and given us all the data that we need to know. We will actually organize another time and bring him back yesterday to educate us, because I realized there's a lot that he's yet to touch. I would like to say that brings us today to the end of our today's edition of Daybreak. My name is Isaac Olupotakonya, and from the crew that made this possible, we wish you a blessed morning.